with images going through my mind of myself pregnant, walking through my high school halls at age 15, and being fearful of my parents, of them knowing that I was having sex outside of marriage, coupled with the morning sickness that was horrendous, and I had to hide from them. It just really made the urgency to abort that first child much stronger. And I couldn't wait to not be pregnant again. And that's all I could think of. There wasn't another person other than my parents that knew and would have encouraged me to seek other options besides abortion in my life at that time. The other thing that compelled me to continue to pursue it was the rampant availability of abortion. When I had my first one in 1973, when it was first legalized, there was hardly anyone that I knew personally that had, and they told us that they would give us a prescription for consecutive months. And again, I was only 15, and this was what was happening. The girls asked similar questions that I had been thinking, and went ahead and started to ask, not just for the first abortion, but this happened in the ones that followed. They would ask, what does it look like at this age? I had two prior to us going to get an abortion for our pregnancy together. And by that time I had had 4. Now the 5th abortion was also different we'll say it was a Christian country, so why would you pass bad rules like abortion if it wasn't okay? So I wanted to settle my own conscience. And so I asked the doctor and nurse if I could see the tissue for this one if we get married, which is a very common post-abortion symptom of trauma, where you feel like you have to have children to make up for the ones that you took their lives through abortion. So when they were finished, and again, I had no pain medicine. It was just as painful as the 3 others. The first one wasn't as much because I did have medication. And after the procedure, after I heard the vacuum shut off, the technician or nurse took the unit that had the blood and the clots. I could just vaguely see it, but she walked over to a table and turned her back to me, and then was just there for a couple of moments. And then she came up to me with her hand extended and said, "See, it's just blood clots and tissue." And I looked at it, and then I saw something, and I thought, well, what's that? And she just took a double look and just said, oh, just probably an early formation of a rib cage, but I doubt it. And so she grabbed what was in her hand, just cupped her hand, and then threw it into the little biohazard receptacle that was in the room. And I just went into a state of shock. Even if it was just an early formation of a rib cage, when I heard the word rib cage, so after the procedure and seeing this tiny rib cage, she led me into the recovery room, and the cot was there, and the juice and the crackers, and I just didn't want any juice or crackers, and I could not stop thinking about what I had seen and her description of it. And then after the 30 minutes of recovery, I was guided out to the waiting room where Rick was waiting for me. And I walked out with just this solemn look and went upstairs to bed. And I woke up the next morning. And looking back, that was just one of several interventions of God's grace in my life. I was in a denial status of not really believing that this happened to me. I would say to myself, just forget about it. You know, you're going to get over this. But I would have thoughts of, gee, I wonder if it was a boy or girl, that would just drop out of nowhere while I was doing something. And then I would fight those thoughts by saying, well, this won't ever happen to me again. I am going to forget about this someday. But I couldn't. And they would haunt me almost daily. And then when I had 4 abortions after that, it only got worse. What I didn't realize is, at the time, is that many women, as the women in my counseling group, were actually using abortion as birth control. I didn't want to take the pills because I didn't want to be telling myself every time I took one that I am having sex at age 15 or 16 and 17. Those were the 3 illegal abortions that I had in Washington, D.C. I also didn't want my parents to find them. So I lived in a cycle of pain, but also there was this wonder. I wonder if I can ever get pregnant again. It was a subconscious thought, and I'm pretty confident that it contributed to the multiple abortions that I had. We actually started getting some pro-life literature in the mail. And as I said, I was struggling with a lot of effects from my abortions, and when the literature came in, I saw that it was about abortion. I had no idea what I was going to see when I started to read it. And one pamphlet was entitled "Children, Things We Throw Away" by Keith Green Ministries. And I looked at the title, and the front of the cover of this pamphlet was, I just began to tear up and put it down again, walked away, because I wasn't about to have a crying spell in front of these 2 little ones. And so after I put them down for a nap, I went and looked again, opened it up, and when I opened it further, there was a picture of a perfectly formed 11.5-week fetus in an amniotic sac. It had not been aborted. It was just a beautiful, tiny, tiny child. And looking at the gestation, I thought, that's how old Rick and my first child was. And then I started to cry and could not contain the tears. I realized they had lied to me. I was angry with myself for doing this, but the rage that I felt inside towards these clinics who showed me the abortion procedure on an empty uterus and didn't put the cutting tools in with the instruments to show that that's what they have to do before they extract a fetus from a uterus anywhere between 12 and I believe it's 20 weeks or so. And then the procedures after that are even more barbaric in latter stages of abortion, which is legal at every gestation in the United States right up to the day of birth. So I was looking at these pictures on and off through waves of tears, and then I did see the one picture that threw me into total grief. The day that I had the 5th abortion, and it was the day I asked if I could see the tissue when they were finished, and they said yes, and I saw Rick and my first child's rib cage. The last picture that I looked at in that pamphlet was of a tiny human fetus that had been destroyed, like mine was, but it wasn't just the rib cage. There was hands and feet and legs and the rib cage. I could not discern where the head was. So I knew that I was seeing something that was so painful. I couldn't hide the pain anymore. For 2 days, it would come in waves, and I would cry, and I couldn't help cry sometimes in front of the kids. And they would ask me, "Mommy, what's wrong?" And I would say, "No, Mommy's just sad about something." And had put them down for a nap the second day of this uncontrollable grief over what had happened. And I turned on the radio to distract me and on the Christian radio station, and there was a program on that talked about when Christians feel guilt and when they feel grief, and that they are very different. And it was just amazing, the timing of hearing this program. And I asked myself, gee, maybe this isn't guilt. Maybe, because I know God has forgiven me, or, I've been taught that and I believe it as best I can. Maybe I'm grieving. And it just gave me this slight sense of hope that in Washington, D.C., and I was riding on Route 55, and it was a very curvy road, 55 miles an hour for the straightaways, but many slowdowns because of the dangerous curves. And as I was driving, I started to hear a voice that was just very condemning. I thought it was myself, but it was, how can you live with yourself with what you've done? Do you really think that God is going to forgive you? Do you really want anyone to know the truth about what you did? And then why don't you just end it? Why don't you just end it now? And I just started to cry uncontrollably again while I was driving. And I thought, I can't forgive myself. I will never be able to live with myself. And I stepped on the gas and purposed to not make one of the curves coming up. And there were 2 large trash bins there next to a very, very old one-room schoolhouse. And I was determined that I was going to take my life in that moment as I accelerated. And stepping on the gas, another voice just kind of invaded my thoughts and said, "Are you going to kill another one?" And I thought, no, I forgot that I was pregnant.